The lunch crowd at Murphy's Diner was bustling with the usual mix of construction workers and office employees when 80-year-old Robert Bobby Castellano made his way slowly through the front door. His Jima veteran cap sat proudly on his gray head, and his worn but clean clothes told the story of a man living on a fixed income but maintaining his dignity. Waitress Karen Mitchell took one look at the elderly customer and immediately made assumptions about his ability to pay. "Excuse me, sir," she called out loudly, blocking his path to an empty booth. "I need to see proof that you can pay for your meal before I seat you. We've had problems with people ordering food they can't afford." Bobby paused, genuinely confused by the hostile reception. In 60 years of eating at diners across America, no one had ever questioned his ability to pay before ordering. "Ma'am, I just wanted to order lunch," he said quietly, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone accustomed to being underestimated. Karen's response was swift and public. "That's what they all say. Look, this isn't a charity. If you can't prove you can pay, you need to leave." The words echoed across the restaurant, causing conversations to stop and diners to turn in their seats. Bobby felt every eye in the place focus on him, transforming what should have been a simple lunch into a public spectacle of humiliation. What Karen didn't know, what her assumptions and prejudices blinded her to, was that 6 young men in civilian clothes had been eating at a corner booth when the confrontation began. They weren't construction workers or office employees, despite their casual appearance. They were United States Marines on leave, and they had just witnessed something that demanded immediate correction. The moment Karen questioned Bobby's dignity, something shifted in the air around the restaurant. These 6 Marines understood something Karen was about to learn. When you disrespect a Marine, you disrespect the entire Corps. Murphy's Diner had been a fixture in downtown Oceanside, California for over 40 years, serving simple meals to military families, retirees, and local workers. The restaurant sat just 3 miles from Camp Pendleton, making it a popular spot for Marines both active and retired. The walls were decorated with military memorabilia, photos of local service members, and faded newspaper clippings celebrating the community's military heritage. Ironically, the very establishment that displayed Marine Corps symbols on every wall was about to witness one of its employees disrespect a Marine veteran in the most public way possible. Bobby Castellano had been coming to Murphy's every Tuesday for the past 5 years, ever since his wife Margaret passed away. The weekly lunch had become his connection to the outside world, a brief escape from the loneliness of his small apartment. At 80, Bobby lived on his Marine Corps pension and Social Security, stretching every dollar but always maintaining his dignity and independence. He'd chosen Murphy's specifically because of its military-friendly atmosphere, assuming he'd be among people who understood and respected military service. His journey to this moment had begun 78 years earlier, on the black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, where 19-year-old Private Robert Castellano had landed with the 5th Marine Division on February. The battle that followed had lasted 36 days, and claimed the lives of nearly 7,000 American servicemen, including many of Bobby's closest friends. Bobby had survived the hell of Sulphur Island, earning a Purple Heart when shrapnel from a Japanese mortar tore through his left shoulder, and a Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded Marines to safety under heavy enemy fire. The memories of that battle still visited him in quiet moments, the sound of incoming mortars, the faces of friends who never made it home, and the weight of survival when so many others had fallen. Karen Mitchell had been working at Murphy's for 3 years, starting as a part-time server while attending community college and gradually becoming one of the senior waitresses. At 28, she'd developed strong opinions about customers who might not be good for business, elderly people who ordered only coffee and toast, families with screaming children, and anyone who looked like they might struggle to pay their bill or leave a decent tip. Her philosophy was simple: maximize table turnover and tips, minimize time spent on customers who weren't profitable. The irony was thick. Karen worked in a restaurant dedicated to honoring military service, surrounded by Marine Corps memorabilia, yet she'd never taken the time to understand what those symbols meant. To her, the military decorations on the walls were just part of the restaurant's theme, no different from the vintage Coca-Cola signs or old license plates that decorated other diners she'd worked in. This Tuesday afternoon, Karen was having a particularly stressful shift. Two servers had called in sick, the kitchen was backed up with a large catering order, and several tables were complaining about slow service. She'd already dealt with 3 difficult customers, and her patience was wearing thin. When she saw Bobby enter the restaurant, something about his appearance triggered all her frustrations about the day. His clothes were clean but obviously old, his shoes were worn but polished, and he moved with the careful steps of someone dealing with age-related mobility issues. In Karen's stressed mindset, he looked like exactly the kind of customer who would complicate her already difficult shift. "Sir, I need to see proof that you can pay for your meal," Karen announced, stepping directly into Bobby's path. "We've had problems with people ordering food they can't afford." Bobby stopped, genuinely confused by the request. "Is there a problem, miss? I've been eating here every Tuesday for 5 years." Karen's expression didn't soften. "Look, I don't know you, and I don't care how long you claim to have been coming here. This is a business, not a charity. If you can't prove you can pay for a meal, I can't seat you." The confrontation was drawing attention from other diners. Several people had pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was happening. Bobby felt the familiar weight of public scrutiny, the same feeling he'd experienced in previous encounters, where his age and modest appearance had led to assumptions about his character or capability. He'd faced this kind of judgment before. At the grocery store, when cashiers assumed he couldn't count his money correctly, at the bank when tellers spoke to him like he was confused, and at various businesses where his age seemed to automatically diminish his worth as a customer. "Ma'am, I understand you're doing your job," Bobby said, his voice steady despite the growing humiliation. "I have money to pay for lunch. I just wanted to order my usual meal." He'd been coming here for 5 years, always ordered the same meatloaf special, always paid with cash, and always left a 20% tip despite living on a fixed income. But today, for reasons he couldn't understand, that history meant nothing. Karen's laugh was harsh and dismissive, carrying across the restaurant like a slap. "Your usual meal, right, and I suppose you tip well too. Look, old man, I've seen this before. You order the cheapest thing on the menu, nurse it for 2 hours, ask for extra crackers and water refills, and leave maybe $1 tip if we're lucky. We can't afford customers like that, especially on a busy day like this." The accusations were not only hurtful, but completely false. Bobby had never lingered over his meal, never asked for special accommodations, and always tipped generously, even when it meant eating ramen noodles for dinner later in the week. But Karen's assumptions had painted him as a stereotypical problematic elderly customer, and she was determined to prevent what she saw as an inevitable problem. The words hit Bobby like incoming artillery. He'd served his country with honor, worked for 40 years as a machinist after leaving the Marine Corps, and raised 3 children who had all served in the military themselves. Being treated like a charity case in a restaurant that displayed Marine Corps memorabilia on its walls was almost more than he could bear. But 6 young men at a corner booth had been listening to every word of the exchange, and their patience was reaching its limit. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, the senior Marine in the group, was the first to recognize what was happening. At 29, Torres had completed 4 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, earning his rank through leadership under fire and a deep understanding of what military service really meant. He'd seen too many young Marines come home from deployment only to struggle with civilian life, and he'd made it his mission to ensure that veterans of all generations received the respect they'd earned. The other Marines around the table represented the diversity and excellence of the modern Marine Corps. Sergeant David Kim, a 27-year-old from Texas, had been a Marine for 8 years and had deep respect for the veterans who had paved the way for his generation. Corporal James Washington, a 25-year-old from Detroit, was already reaching for his phone to document what was happening, understanding the power of social media to expose injustice and create change. Corporal Maria Rodriguez, a 24-year-old from San Antonio and one of the few female Marines in combat roles, was preparing to stand up, her sense of justice outweighing any concern about causing a scene. Lance Corporal Kevin Thompson, a 22-year-old from Montana, was watching with growing anger as an elderly Marine was being treated like a second-class citizen. Private First Class Robert Chen, a 20-year-old from California and the youngest of the group, was learning a valuable lesson about standing up for what's right regardless of the personal cost. These 6 Marines had been enjoying a rare day off together, celebrating Thompson's recent promotion and sharing stories from their various deployments. They'd chosen Murphy's specifically because of its military-friendly reputation, and they'd been enjoying the familiar atmosphere of a place that understood and respected military service. Watching an elderly veteran being humiliated in a restaurant that claimed to honor military service was more than they could tolerate. "You seeing this?" Torres whispered to Kim, who was sitting across from him. Kim, a 27-year-old from Texas, had been a Marine for 8 years and had deep respect for the veterans who had paved the way for his generation. "That's a Marine veteran getting disrespected by someone who doesn't understand what she's looking at," Kim replied quietly, his jaw tightening as he watched Karen continue to humiliate Bobby. The other Marines had also turned their attention to the confrontation. Washington, a 25-year-old from Detroit, was already reaching for his phone to document what was happening. Rodriguez, a 24-year-old from San Antonio, was preparing stand-up. Thompson, a 22-year-old from Montana, and Chen, a 20-year-old from California, were watching with growing anger as an elderly Marine was being treated like a second-class citizen. "This is unacceptable," Rodriguez whispered. "That man earned the right to eat anywhere he wants." Meanwhile, Karen was escalating the situation further. "Look, I'm trying to be nice here, but you need to understand the reality. This isn't some senior center where you can sit around all day nursing a cup of coffee. We have paying customers waiting for tables." Bobby reached slowly into his wallet, pulling out 3 $20 bills, more than enough to cover any meal on Murphy's menu. "Ma'am, would this be sufficient proof that I can pay for lunch?" Karen glanced at the money dismissively. "Anyone can flash some cash. The question is whether you'll actually spend it or just order coffee and toast like most people your age." The insult was the final straw for Torres. Marine Corps values weren't just words to him, they were a way of life that included respect for those who had served before. When a Marine veteran was being disrespected, it was every active-duty Marine's responsibility to act. "Excuse me," Torres said, standing up from his table with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with this gentleman." Karen looked over, annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. Please return to your meal." Torres smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Actually, it does concern me. You see, I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and so are my 5 teammates here. We've been listening to you disrespect a fellow Marine and we're not going to stand for it." As if responding to a silent command, the other 5 Marines stood up from their table and moved toward the confrontation. They didn't make any threatening gestures, but their coordinated movement and obvious military bearing immediately changed the atmosphere in the restaurant. Karen's confidence began to waver as she found herself facing 6 Marines. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm just doing my job. We have policies about customers who might not be able to pay. I'm Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, United States Marine Corps," Torres replied, pulling out his military ID. "These are my Marines. We're stationed at Camp Pendleton, and we've been watching you humiliate a veteran who deserves much better treatment." Sergeant Kim stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'd like to take a look at this gentleman's military credentials, because I think you might be surprised by what you find." Bobby looked up at the young Marines surrounding him, his eyes filling with tears of gratitude. In his 80 years, he'd rarely experienced such immediate and unconditional support from strangers. "Sir, what's your name and unit?" Torres asked respectfully. "Robert Castellano, retired," Bobby replied, his voice stronger now. "I served with the 5th Marine Division during World War II. Where did you serve, sir?" Kim asked. "Iwo Jima," Bobby said quietly. "February through March 1945. The words hit the Marines like a physical force. Iwo Jima was sacred ground in Marine Corps history, one of the bloodiest and most heroic battles the Corps had ever fought. Anyone who had been there was automatically a legend. "Sir, would you be willing to show us your service record?" Torres asked, though the reverence in his voice made it clear he already believed every word. Bobby nodded and carefully reached into his wallet, pulling out a worn leather folder that contained his military documents. He opened it slowly, revealing his discharge papers, Purple Heart citation, and Bronze Star recommendation. Torres took the documents with the same reverence he would show to sacred texts. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent restaurant, "this is Marine veteran Robert Castellano. He served with the 5th Marine Division on Iwo Jima, where he earned a Purple Heart for wounds received in action and a Bronze Star for heroism under fire." The restaurant erupted. Every conversation stopped as diners absorbed what they were hearing. Several people began applauding, and others were openly wiping away tears. The 6 Marines snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute to Bobby, who slowly stood and returned it with the precision that 78 years hadn't erased. "This man," Torres continued, "fought in one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. He helped secure the island that allowed American bombers to attack Japan and potentially saved thousands of American lives. He is a hero, and he deserves to be treated as such." Washington pulled out his phone and began scrolling through military database. "Robert Castellano, 5th Marine Division, Iwo Jima veteran. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Pacific Theater ribbons. This man is a verified American hero." Karen stood frozen, finally understanding the magnitude of her mistake. She had just humiliated one of America's greatest generation, a Marine who had risked his life for his country, when she wasn't even born. But the Marines weren't finished with their lesson. Rodriguez turned to address the entire restaurant. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what a real American hero looks like. Not someone young and strong, but someone who answered his country's call when he was barely 19 years old and fought in one of the most brutal battles in human history." Corporal Washington stepped forward. "Sir," he said to the restaurant manager who had emerged from the kitchen, "I want to give you a chance to make this right. This Marine veteran was just insulted and humiliated by your staff for no reason other than his age and appearance." The manager, seeing 6 Marines in a restaurant full of angry customers, immediately apologized to Bobby. "Sir, your meal is on the house today, and you have my personal guarantee that this will never happen again." But Torres wasn't finished. He turned to Karen, who was now visibly shaking. "Ma'am, I want you to understand something. When you disrespect a veteran, you disrespect everyone who has ever served this country. This man earned the right to eat anywhere he wants, and he should never have to prove that to anyone." Thompson stepped forward with his phone. "Sir," he said to Bobby, "would you be willing to take a photo with us? We'd like to post it to show the world what real military brotherhood looks like." Bobby nodded, unable to speak. The 6 Marines arranged themselves around him, and several customers volunteered to take pictures. The images would later go viral, showing 6 young Marines honoring an elderly veteran and demonstrating the bonds that connected all who had served. As the crowd began to disperse, Torres approached Bobby one more time. "Sir, here's my contact information. If you ever face this kind of disrespect again, you call me." The Marine Corps takes care of its own, and that includes Marines from every generation. One by one, the other Marines offered their contact information to Bobby. They made it clear that he had their support and the support of the entire Marine Corps community. "You're not alone in this," Kim told Bobby. "What happened here today was unacceptable, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again." The video of the confrontation would be viewed over 15 million times in the first week alone. It sparked nationwide conversations about the treatment of elderly veterans and led to policy changes at restaurants across the country. Karen was suspended pending investigation and ultimately chose to resign from her position. Murphy's Diner implemented new training programs to ensure all staff understood the importance of treating veterans with respect. Bobby never paid for another meal at Murphy. The restaurant declared him a VIP customer for life, and the 6 Marines made sure to stop by whenever they were in the area. His weekly lunch became a celebration, with other diners often approaching to thank him for his service. But perhaps most importantly, Bobby never again felt alone or forgotten. The 6 Marines had not only defended his honor but had welcomed him into their brotherhood. They visited him regularly, included him in Marine Corps birthday celebrations, and made sure he knew that his service would never be forgotten. Months later, Bobby would speak at Marine Corps events, sharing his story and inspiring younger Marines. The restaurant confrontation had made him famous, but more importantly, it had reminded the world that heroes come in all ages and that respect for those who served should never depend on their appearance or circumstances. The 6 Marines had taught everyone in Murphy's Diner a valuable lesson that day. Military brotherhood transcends generations, and when one Marine is disrespected, the entire Corps feels it. They had shown that true strength isn't about dominating others, but about protecting those who have already given everything for their country. Bobby Castellano had helped secure Iwo Jima 78 years earlier, saving countless American lives in the process. But on that Tuesday afternoon at Murphy's Diner, 6 Marines had saved something equally important: his dignity, his honor, and his faith in the brotherhood that had sustained him through 8 decades of life. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but the lesson of that day echoed through the military community for years to come. 6 Marines had shown the world what Semper Fidelis really meant: always faithful, not just to the Corps, but to every Marine who had ever served, regardless of their age or circumstance. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with courage, conviction, and the willingness to stand up for what's right. On that day at Murphy's Diner, 6 Marines fought and won a battle for respect, dignity, and the recognition that heroes deserve honor throughout their entire lives.